Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about reviewing a pull request. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, would you think through how you would build a feature before reviewing a pull request built for that feature in order to be influenced by the way it has been implemented? I'm not really sure, that's sort of like don't think about a polar bear for 10 seconds. Well, now it's sort of in there. It's kind of hard to not to do it. It's sort of like if I read information, then it's going to influence me. Like if you learned how to read, you can't unlearn it. You're sort of stuck with it now. And I would say that it doesn't matter if I think about how I would implement this thing or yes or no, because if I'm reviewing code and I don't actually know how to build the feature, then what the fuck am I reviewing for? Well, there is an answer to that, and that is you're scared shitless little junior who doesn't really know exactly how to do this thing. So what you do is that you're trying to be helpful and comment on names of variables maybe, or just read and see what's going on. Even though you're not really sure what's going on because you don't know enough. But on average, when you're reviewing a code review or a pull request or something like that, you should have some idea, that's where the value comes from, of how would you implement this thing, what practices would you use, and the general approach and so forth, because that's sort of the whole point of the pull request system, because otherwise you're just gonna skim it through and look for very small obvious mistake, but you're gonna sort of miss the holistic picture. This is very common in the beginning of things when you're dealing, when you start out in a code base you might not be so familiar with, and then it gets better and better. And some developers never really get here. They just do shit code reviews for the rest of their career because they don't really care so much, because of that thing I've been telling you guys, that the average software developer doesn't have a emotional connection to the work that they do. They have an emotional connection to the work that they are working on, not the team's overall efforts, because they know that practically, if they get blamed for a production issue, that's a problem. If they do a shitty code review and someone gets out something that isn't all that well working, it's a production bug or so forth, it's either the team's issue or that coworker's issue. So a lot of people don't really give it their all and so forth, which is not uncommon. And so, but basically, at least what I try to do is that when I look at the code review, I try to treat that with about as much respect as I would the actual coding of the thing. So that basically means that if you give me a code review and I see that this is not up to snuff, a classic one is there are no unit tests or something like that, then basically that's going to be my first set of comments, and nothing you say will after that it's pointless for me to try to, rather I'm not going to attempt to go in deep on every little detail, because now I already know that this is going to be the first batch of comments. And then when you have created unit tests and you have proven to me that you sort of understand how to define this feature, because this is the thing that unit test is supposed to help you with. It helps you both document what you're intending to do and that thing is actually working and functioning correctly. Now that's going to affect the way you actually write your code as well, which means that if you don't write unit tests, it's likely, depending on how you wrote it, that you're going to have to rewrite some stuff. So, but let's assume for the sake of argument that there are unit tests and so forth, because that makes, as I said, that means that the code now is in a state where you're not just going to drastically change everything because you made a mistake or something like that. Then, yes, I would take a look at the overall structure, because I have to know what you're supposed to be building. A classic one is that nobody checks, you check the pull request, but you don't check the story. That's also a big one. You have to check the story. What are they actually supposed to be making here? And then, as you were saying, you sort of imagine how you would build this feature. And that's sort of it's automatic usually when you've done this for a while, because you get this sixth sense for how things should fit together and so forth and so forth. So this is the difference between, seniority and being a senior and being a junior. When you have seniority, or like you have experience, usually you've seen people build things like 100 different times with pretty much a range of different solutions, and you start to get this, well, as I said, this idea of, yeah, this is a good idea, this is a bad idea. And then of course, let's not forget the all important opinionated ideas you have about how to write syntax in a certain way, or how to structure your logic, or whatever you're doing. That you have your own flavors of how you want to do things and so forth. And I leave it to each individual software developer and each team to sort of bicker about, like, should we do this, should we do that, is this a better approach than that, and so forth. When I've had so many conversations about that I just leave body and say, how would you want me to implement it? And then I just go with it. If it's like, because usually it's like these sorts of discussion, it's a trivial example is double quotes versus single quotes, names, etc., etc. These are things that where, as I've said many times before, guys, they have no net difference to the end result. And so that's more politics than anything else. So unless I have a really good reason for it, I just let that sort of stuff slide. The only time I will make, like, sort of go and say we should be doing this instead of that, is when I see that the implementation goes in a direction that I very strongly think is the wrong direction to do something, or it's going to create a problem, or so forth and so forth. But just because someone implements something in a slightly different way, or with a different pattern of working and so forth, it's very rare that I spend any energy on something like that, because the reality is, which I said that to the other day to my coworker, because he was telling me about this other guy who had started working, and he basically is sitting there now and like on full throttle undoing all the work that he had done and like his other coworkers had done, and so forth and so forth. And I said, well, this is the endless cycle of software development. If you're good at what you do, they're not going to rewrite everything you did. If they're shit at what they do, they're going to do it regardless of if you're good or bad, because everybody wants to write software their own way. So what I want you to take away from this is that the average pull request, yeah, you sort of always think about how you would implement things. That's sort of the whole point of the pull request. It's not like I sit around and like imagine before I look at the code and go, oh, this is how I would build it. I would build it like this, etc., etc. You sort of just get into it after you've figured out what they're actually supposed to be building. And then you have your own ideas of how to do things well. That's sort of the idea of the pull request, where it's just a review where you share your opinions on how to do something. And I will just leave it at that, because some people are very strongly opinionated and think that they know best, and sometimes they're right, sometimes they're not, and sometimes people have opinions about the correct way of doing something arbitrary, which I like to say, like these things that have no net difference whatsoever, like you can do A or you can do B because they're both equal to C. So in those such situations, I'm one of those guys. I don't even tell you that I think that you should do that instead of that, if it's not something that I think is going to have some type of production issue or some type of long-spanning problem with the future development or like future work or so forth and so forth. So if you want to use a variable instead of a constant somewhere or so forth and so forth, I might mention it, but I'm not going to fight you over it. That's at least the way that I work. And well, my suggestion to you when you do code reviews, or just in general, is, as I was saying, absolutely try to formulate your own ideas of how you would implement something, and then try to think about what your implementation would do differently and how much of a difference will that make. Because if your coworker implemented something slightly different, it's still going to work and it's going to do it pretty well, and there's no real problem with it. Is it really important that they do it exactly your way? Just think about that perspective a little bit, because as I said, when you both quit, someone else is going to come along and you're not going to be in that pull request, and they're going to rewrite it anyway, or you're going to go back. Like it's usually a matter of understanding that you can't control the state of the software. It's in a similar way, a little bit broader, like in life. You're just here for maybe 100 years tops, maybe a little bit more if you're really, really lucky. Do what you can in that time and make sure that when you pass the torch to the next person, do that in a nice, clean way. And then just forget about what's going to happen afterwards. You have no control over it. Software works exactly the same way. Do a good job here and now, and then sort of just forget about the code and move on with your life. Have a great day.